2 after, so I'm going to go ahead and get started because I know we're all very busy. Very happy to have you all here today. Welcome. This is the Trident Proposal Management webinar all about NASA SEWP VI. I'm going to walk through today's agenda before I turn things over to Kylie a little bit later on. We're going to do some introductions, make sure that you know who we know who you are, and have everybody in the right place for this webinar. We're going to talk through the opportunity and what we know today, because if you've been following this at all, you know we're still working off of a draft RFP, but we do expect to see that final very soon. So just kind of going to give you the wave tops on things that you need to know about this and where we would recommend you pay a little bit of attention. We're also going to talk about the evolution and the expansion of the program and what that means with regards to areas to watch when that final RFP does finally come out. And then lastly, we're going to close with some actual actions and preparatory actions that you can take while we're waiting for that final RFP. They're going to help prepare you for your best response once it comes out. So just a little bit of admin and housekeeping as we go along here. I have muted all of the participants, so you will not be able to talk. I'm sorry, I have the microphone. You must listen to me and my wonderful colleague, Kylie. But if you do have questions, please feel free to pop those in the chat. We can see that and monitor it on our screen here. And Kylie and I will be keeping an eye out for that. And then on the slides themselves, you'll see these little banners, these little light blue banners with the Trident logo. Keep an eye out for those. They're going to have some key takeaways and things that help summarize or help solidify some points we want to make. And so we just want to draw your attention to those as we go along, in case I get busy and distracted and forget to mention them. Those are your key takeaway bumper stickers. Okay, let's jump in. So first off, hopefully, we just want to make sure we've got the right audience here. So if you are in the right place, if you are a business development lead or a proposal manager who knows that NASA SEWP VI is a must-win opportunity, right? If you see the value in pursuing this and you want to get ready, you're in the right place. If you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the magnitude and complexity of the proposal, we're going to help you feel a little bit better about this. Again, this is the right place for you. And if you're looking for ways to make your proposal more compliant and compelling, this is going to be right up your alley. This webinar is not for anybody who loves the thrill of responding to things with little or no preparation, right? If you like to fly by the seat of your pants and kind of make your own rodeo, you're not gonna enjoy this, right? It's gonna have too much structure and too much good insight for you. If you love that, if you put things off to the last minute, they only take a minute to do, and I know we've all been there. But if you thrive with that excitement, this is not for you. And if you don't have any questions at all about the discrepancies between what was said at the industry day and what's in that draft RFP, then you're not going to find what you're looking for here, because we are going to dive into some of those gaps and what they mean and what you should watch going forward. So a little bit about Trident Proposal Management. If you have not worked with us before, we are a service-disabled, better-known small business that was founded in 2008, so we've been around for a little while. We are based in Southern California, but our team is mostly made up of military veterans, military spouses, and so we are globally dispersed, quite literally. I am in Hawaii. Kylie, this month is in Virginia, right? She used to be in Florida. We were both stationed in Japan for a while, thanks to our wonderful Navy spouses. And our team is really everywhere. And so what that allows us to do is we can use our time zones to help expand the proposal cycle and really work around the clock. So instead of getting 30 days, you get a few more hours built in there when you work with Trident. We do provide full business development lifecycle support to our clients. So everything from business intelligence, right? Looking for those opportunities that you should bid on, helping you through the capture management process, making sure that you prepare appropriately to bid on those opportunities. And then the actual proposal development and proposal management during the response period. That's an area where we can surge in as a team, fit into your team's dynamic and walk you through that process. We also offer training and advisory services on anything proposal related or capture related. And we also have a fantastic branch of executive and presentation coaches. So if you've ever had to respond to a proposal that requires one of those oral presentations, you need to save our contact information, because we've got a fantastic bench of folks who are just experts at integrating with the team and coaching you through it. Even if you've done it before, they always can show up and teach your team something new, give you some tips and tricks about how to respond in real time. So the best thing that we offer for our clients, though, is this flexible and scalable team approach for both small and large federal contractors. We certainly have a concentration of experience in the DoD market, but we work with proposals for all federal agencies. Two lovely faces that you have on your screens today. My wonderful colleague, Kylie Stewart. She's a capture and proposal manager at Trident, and she's also Trident's new client sales lead. So if you have not spoken with us yet and you call Trident, she might be one of the first friendly faces that you meet. And she's just a fantastic person to foster new client relationships and bring people into the Trident fold. She's got 6 years of proposal experience, and she's also the voice of our Trident shorts. So if you check out our website, we have a resources tab that's got blogs, it's got short little videos, and the soothing voice of Kylie Stewart can shepherd you through some different proposal exercises and provide some expert tips that just make the proposal management and development response period a little less stressful. She's also a United States Naval Academy grad. A Navy veteran herself. And then she's, like I mentioned, a Navy spouse and also a fantastic mom. So she's a wonderful part of our team. And with that introduction, I'm Rebecca Wayland. I'm our GWAC lead and our multi-agency or multi-work contract lead. So I help coordinate a lot of these campaigns. You've probably seen me on the YouTube channel, or if you were with us for Polaris or Oasis Plus, then you know my style for these webinars, right? We try to keep it engaging, try to keep it focused on what you need to know. I am the co-author of FastProp, which is Trident's proposal management process. And really the way we like to think about this is that it is the real world version of what you need to do in a limited amount of time with a limited amount of resources to respond to proposals in a way that doesn't make you lose your mind, right? So there's some fantastic industry standard practices out there that are great if you have all of the time and resources in the world. If you live in the real world with the rest of us, where you have a smaller team that's maybe not quite as experienced, or you have people in new roles, or you have multiple bids going on at once, you may want to check out FastProp, because we really distill the proposal management process into the absolutely critical steps that you need to take to submit a compliant, compelling proposal. I've been with Trident for 10 years somehow, working on proposals and training and all kinds of proposal-related activities, and now I do webinars. And I am also a USNA grad, Navy veteran, and Navy spouse. So our contact information is here. If during today's webinar we're not able to answer any of your questions, or if you want to have any follow-up conversations about other services that Trident provides, please feel free to reach out. We'll take good care of you, and we'd love to connect. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Kylie, and she's going to walk you through an overview of NASA SEWP and what we know today. So Kylie, over to you.
Thank you. As many of you know, this is the latest iteration of NASA's multi-award government-wide acquisition contract, and its intent is to streamline and provide a cost-effective way for federal agencies to acquire IT products and services. This is, for the first time, a broad spectrum of IT-related categories, so anywhere from hardware, software, cloud computing, telecommunications, but now with this year with SEWP VI, we're getting services related to IT stuff. So that's a nice change. It's primarily designed for NASA, but it is accessible to all federal agencies. And within this, they have the ability to issue a variety of type of orders. Firm fixed price, firm price incentive fees, labor hour, time and material orders. You can see any variety of those within the final contract awards. It is coded currently for 541512, which is Computer System Design Services, but it's not actually limited to that NICS code. And we're also going to see the United Nations Standard Products and Services Code, that's UNSPSC, on some of the documentation required for this RFP. Generally, NASA SEWP is the gold standard program for IT products and services. And so what they do with this contract is going to be important for future GWACs or other government contract vehicles. So this is an important one to pay attention to, even if you don't actually pursue this one, because it may have implications for future MAIDIQs later on. Am I driving? Okay, cool, thanks. Wasn't sure if I was clicking. So we've been on the NASA SEWP calendar for a minute. The first reverse industry days were held in 2022. And then the RFI came out in 2023 in April. We saw the draft RFP come out in September of last year. And since then, we've had an industry day where they changed quite a bit of that information. So all of the information you see distilled in our webinar today is a combination of what we saw in that draft RFP and what kind of changed in the industry day and our want to say best guess, but assessment of what the final RFP may actually look like based on that. They have described that the RFP will be released before the end of winter. And depending on where you live and how you define that, our best guess for that is March. So we're right here. We're here in the end of February somehow. And we're expecting before the end of winter for this final RFP to come out. So this is a great time for us to kind of understand what they're going to ask for and understand their requirements, so that we can line up our projects and get as much pre-work done so we're not as caught by the seat of our pants when the final RFP comes out. All of this gauged to a May 1st, 2025 award, because this isn't a scorecard contract vehicle like we've seen with some of the other more recent GWACs and IDIQs. There is an assessment portion of this RFP that will take the government some time to get through. So while it is open to a lot more awardees, it will take them time to analyze and look through your submission before the actual award. So we started in 22, we're going to end in 25, but it'll be worth your effort. Hopefully.
Oops, sorry.
I think everybody's driving.
We skipped one. No. I will stop touching it. Sorry. I'm sorry,
Okay.
Kylie.
No, it's okay. I didn't actually know that I had the power to change it. So this is exciting. Okay, so this is kind of where we see the biggest change with NASA SEWP. So this year we've added that light blue column, or those light blue columns, which are your services functions. So it will consist of 3 categories. You'll either be a category A, B, or C. And they've broken that out into products and services. For category A, that's going to be all your information technology, communications, and audiovisual solutions. This is actual products, so providing the government with actual products. Group A1 is unrestricted, so we define that as large businesses. A2 is small business set aside. Coming over to categories B and C, they're the same idea in that you're providing IT services, but category B has enterprise-wide service solutions, whereas category C is programmatic or mission-level service solutions. Category B has a large business pool. I don't want to say pool, I want to say group, large business group, and a small business set aside, whereas category C has a small business set aside and a specifically reserved portion for smaller, more particular set asides. So again, products, enterprise-wide solutions, and then in smaller, minor mission program level solutions. Okay. Now the proposal components. There are 3 volumes that are going to need to be submitted with this opportunity. The first volume is, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the first volume is binary. You either have the ISO certs and the CMMI certifications, or you don't. You either have the mandatory experience or you don't. Separate from that, and where we can get very easily muddled with your NASA SEWP submission, is that the government is asking for both mandatory experience in the terms of relevant experience projects, or REP, as you'll see in the RFP, which is very nicely confusing, and past performance as a volume. And so we're going to try to be very clear about how we describe it, that you will have to do mandatory relevant experience projects and a past performance description of your projects. So let's just talk about volume 1 right now. If you are a large business in category B, if you're in category B and you're a large business, you will have 4 relevant experience projects that cover 4 of the 10 mandatory areas and have a $30 million minimum total value. For a small business, that drops to 3 and 3 of 10 mandatory areas and a $5 million minimum total value. For category C, you again need 3 and 3 of 10 for a $2 million minimum value. As a reminder, category B is the enterprise-wide services, and category C is the programmatic or mission-specific services. And then that special category in category C is for hub zone, service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, and economically disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. And you only need 2 REPs that cover 2 of the 10 mandatory areas for $2 million. So for offer volume 1, we're talking total contract value. And when we get into past performance in the next section, and we're talking about past performance, we've got different contract values. And so we're gonna try to make sure that we're really clear in the difference. Total contract value, you either meet these minimums or you don't, and you cover the mandatory areas or you don't. So what are those mandatory areas?
And sorry, Kyla, before we jump to that, I just want to mention two quick things on that slide. One is that you'll see at the very bottom, the table that's on the left-hand side, that is from the SEWP draft RFP. The mandatory experience criteria that's on the right-hand side, this is what they updated kind of with a voiceover during their industry day. So if you're reading through the draft RFP, these values are not going to match what's in that draft RFP, but what's on the right-hand side of this slide with regard to the number of relevant experience projects, the minimum dollar thresholds, and the number of mandatory areas that you need to cover, that is as of the October 2023 industry day. So we think the final RFP is going to look more like the right side of the slide than what's currently listed in the RFP, because they had some like $30 million values in there for small businesses, and that just doesn't compute. So, and then the other distinction that I want to make, I know everybody can read, but just to foot stomp this, it's not a woman-owned small business category. It's economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business category. And for all of these certifications, HubZone, SDVOSB, and EDWOSB, that's through the SBA. Those are SBA certified, not third-party certifications, and not self-certified anymore, right? So just really want to make that distinction that right now, guidance says it's HubZone, SDVOSB, and economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business. So every economically disadvantaged woman-owned small business is also a woman-owned small business, but it doesn't go back the other way. And Mike, we're going to get to the question about the ISO and CMMI shortly. Okay, sorry, Kylie, back to you.
No, you're good. We've provided the sub areas that we're talking about here when we're talking about like 4 REPs that cover 4 of 10 areas. These are the areas that we're talking about. So for category A, again, that's your products section. We're talking everything related to delivering products to the government. So system storage facilities, security, cloud technology, and any sort of product-based services. For category B and C, these sub areas are not that different. But the difference is the size and scope of that sub area. So for category B, it's going to be anything enterprise wide. And then for category C, you get a couple of extra things in that you get help desk and call center support, as well as database services. So again, mission specific style sub areas. Okay. So on the left-hand side, we're still going to talk about that mandatory experience. So volume 1 is on our left-hand side, and then we'll kind of get into volume 2. So for category A, it looks a little bit different than the other 2 categories because it's kind of more the traditional NASA SEWP relevant experience requirement. You'll submit 2,000 different CLINs into the chart that they've provided within the RFP to indicate or to show that you have the relevant experience necessary. For categories B and C, when we talk about a relevant experience project, we're talking about a single contract or task order where you are either the prime or subcontractor. If you were the subcontractor, you have to not claim credit for the prime's work. If you were the prime, you have to not claim credit for the subcontractor's work. Seems really obvious, but still needs to be said. And those are going to be where you pull your relevant experience projects. Taking a step over into the past performance volume, which is your volume 2, we're going to look at something totally different. Some of the projects that you have that are considered mandatory experience or relevant experience projects may fit for your past performance experience. But they added during the industry day, that all of the relevant experience projects and the mandatory experience projects, they're not necessarily going to be looking at how well you performed during those projects. They're simply going to be evaluating if they meet the contract value minimums and if they meet the relationship to the subcategories. So that's all they're checking there. When we get into past performance, it looks a little bit different. You will have to provide 3 of your most recent similar contracts that are completed and ongoing within 3 years of the solicitation due date to be considered recent. And then they're going to ask you to relate them to the proposed content and scope of the total RFP. For small businesses in A and C, that looks like an average annual value of $500,000, sorry. And then in category B, it'd be an average annual value of $1 million. If you're a large business and you're proposing an A and B, your average annual value for those contracts would be $2.5 million. Okay, so how in the world do you calculate average annual value? It's totally different from how you've calculated average annual value since you've been doing government contracts. They have an example of how to actually calculate this within the draft RFP. I would not be surprised if we see a little bit more clarity in the final RFP on how to actually calculate that. But the right answer is not how you calculated it during Oasis Plus and not how you calculated it during Polaris. So go ahead and check out that description in the RFP because that's going to help kind of guide how you value the contracts. Because there's quite a few weird words in the language they use for how to describe that. So again, when you're talking about volume 1, we're talking about total contract size. When you're talking about volume 2 and past performance, we're talking about average annual value. And so when you're building out your projects in the tracker that we have online, you'll need to make sure that you're paying attention to those 2 columns because they're going to be different and they're going to either qualify or disqualify a project based on those differences and how you plan to use them with what you submit.
And Kylie, if we've learned anything from helping companies figure out which projects qualify and which ones don't, like those details in the math matter so much because, you think like, okay, well, of course this thing ran 3 years and of course the ceiling value is this. And then when you plug it into the formula, you're within $1,000 of meeting the threshold or something. So yeah, really, she mentioned this. We are going to talk about some free downloads that we have to help you guys organize and compile your information. And then, sorry, Kylie, one more thing I wanted to mention on the previous slide.
Yeah.
I know you touched on it where you're not going to be able to submit experience of your teammates. And this is something that I really want to make sure people understand because on previous, scorecard-based evaluations, it might have made sense to form certain teams so that you could earn more points, right? So if you had a certain amount of projects or certain projects that you wanted to put forward as the prime, and then your teammate had another one to qualify, forming a partnership for the purpose of boosting your proposal score might have made sense. You can't use any any of your teammates' experiences for these volumes. So if you're not teaming for the purpose of being able to provide a better solution in delivery, which is still an important function of teaming, right? You still may want to talk in your management section about the delivery team that you're bringing. Just know that they are not going to be able to contribute to your score in either of these 2 areas. And Linda, I see your question about the small businesses and JVs, and I'm writing it down so we can come back and cover that. Those JVs, man, can of worms. So we'll put a pin in that and circle back. Okay, sorry. Back to you, Kylie.
Okay, so we have steps for award. How do we actually eat this elephant? And this is really volumes 1, 2, and 3 in step form. So for volume 1, you have to have your mandatory relevant experiences, REPs in the RFP, with your current ISO 9000, 2008, and 2015. If you're a small business, those can be in progress, but they have to be started. Categories B and C do require a CMMI dev or a CMMI service level 2 or higher in addition to that ISO cert. So I think, is it Mike? I think you asked that question. Yes, you do have to have both your ISO cert and the CMMI dev if you're a small business. Or sorry, dev or CMMI service. And then for volume 2 is going to be that neutral, moderate, high, or very high level of confidence past performance rating. And Rebecca will talk about that in just a little bit. Volume 3 is that 3rd step, that high confidence in mission suitability and high confidence in both sub-factors of the mission suitability. And so this is where we get into between the past performance evaluation and the mission suitability evaluation is where we get into why this contract will take until May of 2025 to award. because there will be some subjective analysis of kind of how you've performed in the past and how confident the government is that you can perform this. You have to meet step 1, that first wicket, go, no go, in order to even move past into the past performance rating or into the mission suitability. And then, of course, you have to be classified as a responsible source, according to the FAR 9.104. The good news is that there's no anticipated cap on the number of awardees. And so as long as you can hit these wickets and get through these steps, then there's no reason why you wouldn't be awarded into NASA SEWP. So that seems easy. So I'm going to turn it to Rebecca so she can explain why it's not so easy.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I'm going to take back over driving. Okay. So, and I do see your question, Albert. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the phase 1 and 2 evaluation. So Kylie just walked us through the 4 steps, and that comes directly from the Industry Day slide. And if you've attended anybody else's webinar, I think it's hilarious that we've all of the industry partners have included that slide, but we've all changed the colors. So none of us liked NASA's color palette. Ours is more vibrant, right? Makes it seem more go-getter. Okay, so what we do anticipate is that even though this is a phased evaluation, the whole proposal is going to be due at once. So it's not like you submit your ISO 9000 cert and they say, okay, now please turn in everything for mandatory relevant experience. And now please turn in past performance. Like, it's not going to be like that. We're going to assemble the whole proposal and turn it in. These certifications are pass-fail, as Kylie mentioned, and it's really important to note that there's no transitive property that applies here for that ISO 9000 cert. So if you are providing products that come from an ISO 9000 certified provider, you can't then say, well, all the projects were developed using ISO 9000 properties, and so we should get credit for that. No, the cert needs to be in the name of you as the prime offerer. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's a pass-fail criteria, but because NASA has left the door open a little bit on having this cert in progress, and they're giving you basically 12 months from award to get it, it'd be silly if this was the thing that derailed your bid, right? Like if everything else is looking pretty good and you're like, oh, but we're just not ISO 9000 certified, 9001 certified yet. Why not get that started? It is important to note that you won't be permitted to bid on any task order. So if you get the award because you've qualified since your cert is in progress and it just hasn't come through, you won't actually be able to compete on task orders until that cert is finalized. But again, if this is the first thing you're like, oh gosh, we're not quite there yet, maybe you should start it. And there's going to be really specific guidance in the final RFP around what you need to provide in terms of showing that the cert has been started and is in progress. As it relates to mandatory relevant experience, so what we're looking at here, right, the past performances must meet the recency criteria, which we expect to be updated and calibrated based on the final RFP release date / due date. And then the degree of relevance. So this comes back to those functional categories, right? Where does your project align, and can you show that it was related to some of those sub areas for the functional categories? And they're defining relevance here as being a combination of relevant in size and in content. What's interesting is if we shift over to past performance, right? So we're looking at projects to see kind of how well we did. It looks good on the surface because they say, well, you have to be neutral, moderate, high, or very high level of confidence in order to proceed. So you're like, okay, well, I could get one of those scores, right? If you look at the kind of the minimum definition, right, this moderate level of confidence, this doesn't read like a satisfactory. This still reads like good performance just to get the moderate rating, right? So they are looking at making sure your past performance is pertinent to the acquisition. You still have to demonstrate effective performance. You have to be fully responsive to the contract's requirements. And then if you had reportable problems, they had to have had little identifiable effect on the overall performance. And then based on that, there should be a moderate level of confidence that you would successfully perform the effort. So there's just some really interesting nuance. And the difference between a moderate level, a high level, and a very high level really comes down to some very specific semantics. And actually, the other interesting contrast to do is to look at the difference between moderate and low. There's not a lot of gap there. So really making sure that your past performance is going to get you the high enough rating to proceed is going to be very important. And Albert, yes, CPARs and questionnaires do factor into this decision. Okay, so with phase 3, right, this is where you actually have the narrative section of your proposal. You get to write 10 pages for your management, or 30 pages for tech. What they're looking for here, they've got very consistent criteria, so that's good, right? Effectiveness, reasonableness, and efficiency. Those are kind of the buzzwords for this section as it relates to the tech approach. Now, even though this is your narrative section where you can get a little bit more into the persuasive and compelling writing, it's not pass-fail, but there's still very binary evaluation criteria here, right? You are either going to be rated as high confidence or minimal confidence. And you have to have high confidence in tech and in management in order to be rated high confidence overall. So if you leave a shadow of a doubt on either one of these sections, it's on you as the bidder to convince the evaluators that you are in the high confidence category. And I've included the definition here of high confidence and minimal confidence, just so you can see there's one word that's different, right? With high confidence, the government thinks you will be successful in performing the contract. With minimal confidence, you may be successful. So that the distance that exists between will and may is not very much. So we just want to make sure that you're tracking that. So again, not a pass-fail volume, but kind of a pass-fail volume. And you have to pass both things with high confidence in order to advance to the actual award phase. Okay. Before we leave this section, I just want to talk through, because Albert had a really good question about the 8A. Yeah, that's technically not a set-aside category for this, and it's likely because there's other contract vehicles, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in this upcoming section. And then for the $2 million threshold, so you have a really good question around a collection of task orders, where you can basically aggregate work under a contract and say, look, all of these projects were kind of small, but if you take them in the aggregate where all of the work was pretty much the same, and maybe it was even for the same customer, we should be able to count this as one project. The short answer is, I think there's a lot of people watching to see if NASA is going to permit that. Where I have seen it permitted previously, it's been limited to single award IDIQs, where basically the reason that the projects are split up into individual task orders is for funding purposes, so that the government can space things out a little bit more. But you're right, there's one master statement award for it. We don't expect that full IDIQs or BPAs will be permissible as a project, and that's pretty standard on these GWACs, right? Like, you can't just have the IDIQ, you have to have actually done work on the IDIQ. And since the funding is often not issued at the IDIQ level, it's at the task order level, the task order becomes the project. So the short story there is, I doubt they're going to allow vendors to aggregate projects as a collection of task orders unless it's in those limited circumstances like a single award IDIQ for an agency, but we don't know. If you have not poked your head into NASA's comment tool for the draft RFP, the comment period is closed, but you can still read all the Q&A. There's over 1,000 comments / questions that are in that. And NASA has assured us that when they issue the final solicitation, all of our questions will be answered, and there'll be responses to all of those comments released along with the final RFP. So that's an area to watch. And I think that advice carries for the small business joint ventures as well. Linda, to your question, there's not a lot of restrictions, right, in terms of the teaming partnerships that you're allowed to bid with on NASA SEWP VI. And in fact, I encourage you to have a team, especially if you need to show that you can get products from multiple vendors so that they're available for the lifetime of the contract, or for the lifetime of the contract, because that's the expectation, is that if you sell computers, you can sell computers for the whole time you have NASA SEWP. So if you need to have some redundancies built in, or for supply chain risk management factors, whatever the case might be, you can bid as these other entities. There may be restrictions on the use of projects. So I don't know that we went too far into detail on this, but and I know we're going to cover it at the end of the project, but if you are providing experience that you performed as a subcontractor, for example, you don't get to claim the whole contract, right? You would only get to claim the portion of the work that you actually performed. And usually we see similar language carry forward to joint ventures, where maybe one entity of the joint venture can use that project, but not both. Or if both are using it, then you have to deconflict who's getting credit for what. And there's going to be some specific guidance around there. The other thing that I would encourage you to look at is within the draft RFP, there's a reps insert section that's pretty well populated. And they do talk about different representations in there and just making sure that you understand how you would be bidding and what's permissible. So there might be some things you could check out there just to give you kind of an insight on what's going to be permissible there. So we haven't seen any restrictions in terms of bidding as a JV, but it's really going to come down to whose experience do you get to use. And we'll talk a little bit more about that under the compliance section. Okay, so every brief about NASA SEWP, we kind of have to acknowledge where this program has come from, because Kylie mentioned, she told you this was the gold standard, right? I mean, this thing's been around since I was in the 3rd grade. And I will not tell you how long ago that was, but you can do some mathing. So when it started out, though, it was not a very broad contract, right? Back in the 90s, $800 million ceiling, and there were 8 awardees, and it grew over time pretty significantly, right? And the advertised ceiling for NASA SEWP VI is $25 billion, but we really think that's the starting point, because NASA SEWP V is at $62.8 billion already, and things don't tend to shrink over time, right? And especially not with the addition of the services categories. So we think there's going to be as many awardees on NASA SEWP VI, probably more. But again, since there's no cap, it's kind of tough to say how many qualified businesses are actually going to bid and what that distribution is going to look like. But the takeaway from this slide is that this has grown over time, and it's out there as the model contract because it puts customer service so central. And they can get orders staffed with just speed and efficiency and consistency in ways that other GWACs would love to be able to do. Okay, so this is from the Industry Day slide, right? And in their words, the things that are changing. So Kylie touched on a lot of these things already. SEWP V was only firm fixed price orders, and now we're going to see firm fixed price, time and material, labor hours, fixed price award fee, and incentive fee. And that's all to be expected with the expansion into services too, right? Things are a little less cookie cutter sometimes. Product-based services, sorry, any services associated with SEWP, it's a little bit of a tongue twister, really were services that had to come along part and parcel with the products. And now we have things like innovation and training and help desk. And then services were determined to be in scope or not at the task order level. And now we have these broad category areas that are going to determine what goes where. So that's kind of the takeaway here. But again, that expansion to include the services is a big deal. I don't want anybody to hurt their eyes trying to figure out who's doing how much business here under NASA SEWP V. The takeaway here is that everybody is using SEWP V. And we expect the growth, right, with this expansion from not just products into services to be pretty organic, because if people have already come to SEWP V and it's fit their needs on the product side, why wouldn't they give it a go for the services side? So this is, again, the takeaway here is everybody's using it. NASA, it's their contract, but they're kind of the PMO, they are the PMO, and they're there largely in an administrative function. It's the DOD, it's the DOI, it's the DOJ, all these other departments are making really good use of SEWP, and we would expect that they'd continue to do so. So, and I just want to give a quick shout out because we got this data from Capture too, and I'm sure they're like, no, we want you to show all the graphs, but this is actually, I think, really impactful just to show that yes, this represents $22 billion. Like, this is a crazy amount of just IT products that's happening out there. So. Okay, this is actually from the GWAC dashboard, right, that you can go and log on open source. But there are other GWACs in existence, right? GWACs are the ones that are primarily designed for IT services and product acquisition. So the GWAC game is not new, right? NASA SEWP's been around for a long time. Nobody would be surprised to see that 8A Stars 3 is in this category, right? And that might be one of the reasons that that 8As are not a specific set aside as of right now. Right, we have that caveat, the asterisk with everything since we're working off of draft guidance. Right now, 8A is not a separate category, and neither, but service disabled veteran owned is. And there's been a lot of conversation about that, especially because Polaris had an SDVOSB category. So I don't know necessarily the rhyme or reason as to why certain set asides are included and others aren't. I know all of the agencies do a ton of market research ahead of time. So if they create an avenue, they saw some demand signal for it, or some signal that said that there needed to be more avenues created. So the takeaway here, though, is that you as a potential bidder might just want to think through which contract vehicle makes the most sense based on your customer base and your socioeconomic set-aside category. Because the good and bad thing about NASA SEWP VI with that no cap is that a lot of people could be on it. So you could be a winner, right, of the IDIQ, but you're going to have your work cut out for you at the task order level. And so if you are one of those other socioeconomic set-asides, make sure you're applying for the right functional category and set-aside category that makes sense for you, where you think you can do the most business with the most realistic competition. Okay, and we make that argument every single time. Like, everybody wants to be part of the shiny object, be a winner here, but the IDIQ is just the license to hunt, right? It does not guarantee that you're actually going to be able to get work on the order if you're not putting in the business development steps to drive business to that vehicle that you have. Okay, so again, this is just kind of a quick comparison between some other IT product and service vehicles that are out there. So with VETS II, that's for the service-disabled veteran-owned small business set-asides. There's 45 primes on that contract. Their ceiling in comparison to everybody else's is pretty low, right? Only $5 billion. With 8A Stars 3, they've got a $50 billion ceiling, but that's all for 8As. So you can have, you can be an 8A or an 8A joint venture on that contract, and there's 434 awardees to date. With Alliant 2, everybody I'm sure is tracking that Alliant 3 is coming up probably at the end of this year. But we're talking about, I think they awarded 61 contracts in that originally on Alliant 2, and now they're down to only about 44 active primes. So when Alliant 3 comes out, we think it's going to be 60 seats there. And it's going to be totally unrestricted, because if you followed our webinar series, the small business component of Alliant 2 was protested into oblivion, and then it became Polaris. And that is still, I think they just cleared the last protest on that. So I'm hoping we see some awards and some on-ramps here in the not too distant future. But so if you're a small business and you do IT services, that's one to watch, because that one is scorecard driven, still very heavy in the relevant experience categories. And that's how you would score points, and you can get additional points for certifications and things like that. But the big appeal of Polaris when that came out, what everybody was talking about, is that it doesn't have a ceiling, right? It's theoretically unlimited, and it could be in the $45 to $75 billion range. We don't know until we see how well people are able to make use of it once it gets awarded. I'm going to stay optimistic there. But the downside with Polaris too is that, other than not being awarded, it has limited number of seats in the different socioeconomic sides. All right, so it was for 100 seats for small businesses, 80 for women-owned small business, 70 for service-disabled veteran-owned, and 60 for hub zone. So we'll see what happens there. With ITES 3, this one's got, again, only $12 billion ceiling. But there's 85 small businesses and 50 large businesses using that one. CISP 4, this is another one that's still lingering out there. Hopefully it gets sorted out soon. But that one's going to have 445 companies on it. So, what's the best pool for you, or what's the best vehicle for you to consider based on the kind of services that you provide, the customers who you want to reach, and what your competition looks like? Because if we know that there's going to be at least 140 on NASA SEWP VI with this $25 billion, maybe one of these other vehicles makes more sense for you. Maybe NASA SEWP is the answer. Let's see. We are not going to email the slides, but we are recording this webinar, and we will make sure that you guys get a link to it so you can come back and reference this. Okay, so here's the good stuff, right? Here's where we're going to give you some affirming actions about what you can do to prepare, just in case this has been a little overwhelming for some reason. So our best advice to you is get organized now, right? So I wish I had a pithy little, acronym we could say. GOOP doesn't really spell anything. It's not real catchy, but we want you to gather your project records and documentation, because as I mentioned, the devil's in the detail, right? Everything Kylie's talking about with making sure you know the start date, the end date, the ceiling, the obligated amounts. You might be surprised when you look into your records that not everything matches, or maybe what's in FPDS doesn't reflect the latest mod and amendment and ceiling increase, or whatever has happened over the life of your work. So make sure you start building your library. You can use our free downloads, and we'll give instructions for that. Anybody who has registered for this webinar is going to get those. You'll get a link to those where you can download them. It's 2 spreadsheets just to help you compile your projects, start to get your head wrapped around what you've got, what you don't. And what's really helpful about these, other than the fact that they're free, is that when we get that finalized criteria that says, okay, the minimum threshold value is not 5 million, it's 5.25 million. You can look at your projects and just at a glance see what still qualifies and what doesn't. And don't waste any more of your time trying to get projects to qualify if they don't meet the minimum criteria, because it's a binary section. So compliance is really important here, and being able to make decisions quickly is going to help you use the 60 days, which is our step 3, right? So start thinking through this plan for how you're going to build your 60 days to build and review your response. When do you want to have your projects down selected by? When are you going to send out your questionnaires by? When do you want to have a review of your management plan? When do you want to have your technical solution built? When do you want to do your compliance checks? Like 60 days sounds like a lot of time until you put it in the context of how much work goes into a proposal like this to make sure that everything is locked tight. And then lastly, last but not least, right? Engage with the customers who are going to need to validate your past performance references, because you're going to have to send them a form where they say, yes, they did all these things and we concur with these dates and these values and the work was wonderful. And that doesn't come back to you. So this is something that it's a point of departure from Polaris and Oasis Plus. So on those things, you took a project validation form or a past performance questionnaire to your customer, they signed it and gave it right back to you. So you knew what they said about you, right? You knew what you got rated on for past performance, and you knew whether or not they completed it. With this, you're going to send them a form and you're going to say, oh, please, please, please send it to the government by this date at this email address. And you're going to have to hope that they do it. So we would just recommend that you start having those conversations now so that your customers know, hey, we're going to be pursuing NASA SEWP VI. It's a really important contract for us. We're going to need your participation in filling out this questionnaire. We would just appreciate that when you get it, you turn it in 2 weeks' time. And then, by the way, you are going to have to submit a copy to the government of everybody that you sent a questionnaire to and the date that you sent it and their contact information so they can follow all of that. Okay, and then the other set of people to engage with obviously would be any OEMs or any vendors. If you're submitting under category A with the products, just making sure they know what your relationship's going to look like. What are your teaming requirements? How are they getting the bid as part of your proposal? Okay, and then if you do need help with the bid no bid decision, you can contact us. And Albert, I see your note again. So I don't know if they're going to permit that aggregation, that collection of task orders, unless it's in very limited circumstances. So as they've defined projects to date, a collection of task orders was not included. So I would not bank on being able to aggregate any work under a collection of task orders for the purposes of when you're getting organized now and getting ready to submit. So obviously, NASA reserves the right to change any of this with the final RFP. And if I would also encourage, if you don't see that spelled out, there's different philosophies I know about asking questions during a proposal. I'm like, well, you don't ask a question you don't want the negative answer for, right? Like if you don't want to be told no, then don't submit the question. I think on a bid like this, where compliance is so important and the requirements are so binary, you have to have clarity on whether or not the thing you're submitting is permissible. So if for some reason we don't see clarified guidance with that final RFP, we should absolutely submit a question to the government so that they say unequivocally, yes, this is permitted and here's what qualifies, or no, stay away from that and don't submit a collection. Okay, so do want to make you aware of some free Trident resources that we have in addition to this webinar, and in addition to having contact information for myself and for Kylie. We do have a video library we're going to be adding to this, especially once the final is issued, because we just know there's a lot of details to track in that 60-day period, and we're all very busy, right? We also do have these free downloads, and this is on our Trident website. If you go to we have a contract vehicles tab right at the top, you'll see NASA SEWP in that drop down. That's the page you want to bookmark, because you're going to get your free downloads there that help you organize your projects. It's going to have our contact information if you want to reach out and get some help with compliance or with the desktop publishing. And then we also have a running blog on NASA SEWP VI, and I am working on my update for this week that's going to include some of the information we've talked about today, in terms of who should bid and what the overall opportunity summary looks like and those kind of things. Okay, so compliance areas to watch for NASA SEWP VI. I can just see the train coming on some of these areas based on what's gone before on previous GWACs and where companies kind of stumble. So this first bullet is really important. This is in the draft RFP, and they reiterated it at the industry day, but you cannot duplicate or have any replicated content from another proposal. And if they find that you have a management plan that very closely maps or maybe is verbatim with somebody else's, you're both out. So just make sure that you're not reusing any content across different teams or with different vendors that would show up, potentially in the same way. The certification status, right? So all of you small businesses who are permitted to have this in progress, make sure you know what the evidence requirements are for that, and make sure you understand your timeline for having it finalized, because they will offer it. They've been very clear about this. They'll give you 12 months to get it. You don't have to have it at submission, but if you don't have it at the end of the 12 months, you're going to be sitting out the rest of the contract. And then some project gotchas. Again, this is kind of based on our experience from Oasis Plus and Polaris. If you are using a project that you performed while you were the sub, you are permitted to do that if you are the prime now on for NASA SEWP VI. However, you don't get credit for the whole project. You only get credit for the parts of the project that your company actually performed that you can substantiate. And I think we're going to see some guidance around how that's specifically going to happen. So it might be that you have to submit your subcontractor statement of work that very clearly ties to the prime's larger contract, so that you can kind of reverse engineer your way into the task that you did and the dollar amount, and they can say, yes, very clearly you get credit for $2 million worth of work under this project, and everything you did was actually in scope. It wasn't like program management on an IT contract. So making sure you've got that level of detail and distinction ahead of time is going to save you some legwork down the road. Making sure you understand the minimum compliance. I know we've stopped and talked about this at multiple parts or points along the way today, and it's because it is so important. Making sure your project meets the recency criteria, right? Actually write down the start date and the end date and make sure it matches what's on your documentation. Make sure that it fits within the last 3 years, and you've got, if they institute a minimum amount of months of performance, like make sure your project is there, and make sure you're calibrating that correctly, based on whether they say date of proposal submission or date of proposal release. That can make a big difference. Category alignment. This sounds, again, really straightforward, but you'd be surprised. Make sure that if you say, yeah, I've got this project that's relevant to category B, that it's actually relevant to category B. They spent a lot of time at the industry day talking about what's in scope where and how certain things would align. And in general, I would say that they've tried to leave the guidance broader so that it's more inclusive, but that also can put some of the onus back on you to make the justification. So just make sure that your statement of work and whatever project documentation you have with regards to the tasks that you actually performed, that it's intuitive to anybody reading it that yes, it actually aligned to category B or category C as applicable. And then do not mistake simple eval criteria, right? Something that's binary, for being easy. So the minimum standard here is still a very high standard when it comes to those minimum relevant experience projects and the past performance criteria. Don't leave any doubt for the evaluators. And then also, again, management and tech, right? If you're not high confidence, you're minimal confidence. There is no middle ground. It is not a spectrum. It is a binary scale. So when the evaluation criteria is this binary, compliance is critical. And that's one of the reasons that we have the packages tailored like this that we're offering for our NASA SEWP support. So if you know that you're going to need a little bit of help preparing this bid, we're here for you. We have a compliance check package where we're going to look at your whole proposal twice. We're going to do a midpoint check. We're going to do a pre-upload check. We're going to make sure that you get some constructive comments back on any gaps, any areas of concern, and just make sure that you've dotted all of your I's, crossed all your T's, and that you're actually ready to submit with confidence before you send your proposal out to be evaluated over the next however many months it's going to take them. If you feel pretty good about that and you just want to make sure that your 30 pages is within the right, the fonts and the margins and all those desktop publishing things, we've got a tech editing service that's also available for this, because we know that, again, you guys are all very busy, and we know how to evaluate things to make sure that you don't leave any doubt in the evaluator's mind, that you are high confidence, right? You want to be high confidence, not minimal confidence. We can help you get there with some high impact writing techniques, and also just the desktop publishing and formatting that makes sure that everything is tight and ready to go. And if you want both of these services, we absolutely have a combined package deal that we would be happy to help with on that. And again, if you have some general questions, once we get the final RFP, we are going to have a formal bid, no bid eligibility review, where we'll be able to take that project tracker that we've already given you for free. We're going to take that. We're going to look at that against what they determine the final criteria is going to be for the evidence as it relates to the certifications and some of the mandatory project documentation. And we'll be able to tell you, yeah, you're in good shape, or no, this would be great in another 5 years. And we'll have that conversation with you. Okay. If you need any more information, if you haven't already checked this out, NASA SEWP has its own dedicated website for SEWP VI. I do want to bring your attention, though, you will need to create a login if you want to view all of the comments for the draft RFP to date. And there's a little bit of a lifespan on this website, only because when we do see the final solicitation, it's not going to be released on this website. It's going to be on sam.gov, where all of the solicitation things are. So I would just recommend that you check out, if you want to see that draft RFP with all of its inconsistencies. Sorry, I know everybody's doing their best to reconcile things. If you want to listen to the industry day, if you have 4 hours or you need help sleeping at night and you can listen to those recordings, they're here for you. Or if you want to check out the industry day slides that they released in October, just so you can kind of have all of the ground truth baseline information. We did our best to summarize it and cite it for you here today. But if you want to go back to the source, this is where it is. And yeah, just recommend you do that. And you can download the RFP as it exists today. Again, the comment period is closed, but this is what it'll look like once you log in. And you can see the RFP, all RFP comments tab at the top. And if you want to read through all 1,000 of those, they've already answered some of them, and there's some that are still, there's many, I would say, that are still pending that final RFP. But otherwise, if you need more information, we'll hang on here for a couple minutes. I know we're right at time. Kylie, we kind of did amazing coming in right at the last minute, which was very good, because usually I talk too long. Do want to give a special thanks to Mount Indy. I know they helped promote our webinar today. They're one of our valued partners. And yeah, we'll hang on in case there's any questions that you guys have. And otherwise, we really look forward to hearing from you. And thank you so much for joining today.